Hello friends, and welcome back to this course titled as British Poetry. Friends, we are on Unit 10 discussing a very beautiful yet mysterious poem of Samuel Taylor Coleridge. As you know, the name of the poem is Kubla Khan. And we have discussed a very interesting topic, fancy and imagination, in the last class. Now, in today's lecture, we are going to discuss the next topic of this unit and of this poem. The name of that topic is Dream Vision in Romanticism. Till now, we have spent 1 hour, 2 lectures of 30 minutes each on this poem Kubla Khan, and I can, let us say, assume that you know that this poem is a dream fragment, a daydreaming under the influence of opium by S.T. Coleridge. And Coleridge was a romantic poet. He has written this poem indicating the characteristics of romantic age. So, this poem is a combination of a dream vision and romanticism. We are going to discuss in today's 30 minutes lecture about this concept of dream vision in romanticism, how this concept of dream vision is aligning with the romanticism in this poem Kubla Khan. But before, let us say, moving to the content of the poem, let me tell you what are you going to learn from this lecture. You would be able to appraise Coleridge's dream vision of romanticism in Kubla Khan, appraising, appreciating, understanding what is this dream vision all about. How the dream vision is applied in the poem Kubla Khan, you are going to, let us say, enrich your knowledge about these concepts after understanding the, let us say, this lecture. So, without wasting much time, let us now begin discussion on this concept of dream vision in romanticism. Kubla Khan is considered to be one of the greatest poems by the English romantic poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge. There is no doubt into it. Who said he wrote the strange and hallucinatory poem shortly after waking up from an opium influenced dream in 1797. All of us know that. This is an incident, a common incident of the Coleridge's life. In 1797 it happened. This poem is talking about a strange experience which Coleridge had in the dream. This is a hallucinatory poem. Poet was in a, let us say, state of hallucination, you know, half conscious, and then in that case of hallucination he is trying to feel, let us say, the reality of virtuality. In the first part of the poem, the speaker envisions the landscape surrounded the Mongol rulers and Chinese Emperor Kubla Khan's summer palace called Xanadu. Friends, as soon as we, let us say, begin the poem, discussion on the poem, we have in mind that now we are going to read a romantic poem. So, it might, let us say, talk about the leaves, the flowers, the outer nature, etc., which let us say William Wordsworth is fond of talking about. But when we, let us say, start discussing this poem, we see that the speaker of this poem is trying to envision a landscape. An altogether different world is being constructed. The world is surrounded by the Mongol rulers and Chinese Emperor Kubla Khan. All of us know that there was a struggle for years, for, let us say, centuries, which went on between the Mongol rulers and the Chinese emperors, and Kubla Khan was one of them. He was trying to build a summer palace where he can, let us say, stay in the summer region. He is a very rich person, very powerful, and the name which he gave to this summer palace is Xanadu. Now, what is a Xanadu? The Xanadu is describing it as a palace of beauty, pleasure and violence. So, again, let us say, juxtaposition which we see in these, let us say, different elements. There is beauty in the palace, then there is pleasure in the palace, and there is violence as well, because no strong and powerful ruler is without the blood hands. They have to put their hands in blood, they have to do the massacres, they have to do the bloodshed, they have to, let us say, kill many people, they have to take the, let us say, this violent path to establish their power all around the globe. The speaker suggests that these qualities are all deeply intertwined, and in the final stage announces a desire to build a pleasure palace to the speaker's own through song. When, let us say, we read this poem, there is a suggestion which is made by Coleridge here, that the qualities are deeply intertwined. We cannot separate one quality from another quality when we read the first stanza to the last stanza of the poem, and ultimately the poem announces a desire to build a pleasure palace. Maybe Coleridge himself want to build that pleasure palace, but he do not have that opportunity in his lifetime. The speaker's own song is that pleasure palace. Poet thinks that if he is unable to bring the, let us say, create that pleasure palace, then he will build a poem, the song, and that song will be the epitome of that pleasure palace in the poem Kubla Khan. The poem is one of Coleridge's most famous and has been interpreted in many different ways. All of us know this very famous poem. Overall, though it is impossible to think of it as speaking to a creative ambitions of poetry itself as well as to its limitations. Friends, when we look at the prospects of this poem, the different possibilities which this poem has, we feel that this poem, let us say, speaks about the creative ambitions of poetry and the limitations of poetry as well. To which extent romantic poetry can reach, what is the ambition which poet want to achieve, and what are the limitations of poetry? Well, friends, both are opposite ideas, but they are actually visible in the poem. When you read this poem, you will see that the imagination has reached to its ecstasy, and which is why we can see that how far we can imagine, and we see that how far, let us say, the imaginations can reach and what are their limitations. The dream vision which Coleridge uses in Kubla Khan as well as a fascination with dreams have the long history dating back to classical times. Friends, Coleridge is not the first person who is talking about the dream vision. Rather, the fascination towards dreams is visible in, let us say, long back literatures as well, the classical times, the Greek times, the Roman times. There are, let us say, poets and writers who have talked about this dream vision kind of poetry. Dreams inspired, confused and challenged people to find their meaning. Philosophers such as Microbius and Aristotle tried to conduct research on dreams and explain the cause and significance of nocturnal messages. So, friends, the attempts have been made since the time of Aristotle. What is the purpose of dreams? What kind of dream you have seen? What are the symbols which are represented through that dream? And different kind of nocturnal messages were, let us say, being interpreted, researched upon about the dreams since the ancient time philosophers. More recently, the contemporary analytical perception of dreams result from Sigmund Freud's Die Traumdeutung. So, this poem which Sigmund Freud wrote, the English version is titled as Interpretation of Dreams, is the, let us say, the modern analytical perception about the concept of dreams. The Romantic period was no exception to this. In England, Romantic poets considered dreams to be a manifestations of the romantic imagination. Friends, when we talk about Romanticism, the first idea which comes into our mind is the imagination. And this poem is the best example of it. Romantic period was no exception to that, let us say, interpretation of dreams. When we talk about, let us say, romantic poets of the age, they consider the dream to be a manifestation of romantic imagination. They consider dream as, let us say, true in its sense, almost real to this world, especially because of their interest in wild nature. The Romantics believed in the wild nature of human beings, the individuality, subjective feelings, and an individual spontaneous and untamed expression of thoughts. Friends, the Romantics did not believe in control, limitations, but they expected something in their life spontaneous. They expected the untamed expressions. Untamed expressions means which cannot be controlled, the thoughts which cannot be controlled, the feelings and the individuality was preferred by the Romantic poets. Writers used dream fantasies as an image of literary and artistic ideas and developments. When we look at the writers who wrote about dream fantasies, and they were trying to create an image out of those dream fantasies, for the literary artistic ideas and developments, we were able to understand that these artistic ideas and these developments were actually scientifically proven. They had their justifications and their arguments, we cannot deny them. Accordingly, the dream process was connected to the creative process. So, now this is something which is related to Romanticism, friends. We say that what is a dream? What is the process of a dream? And then we will connect the process of dream with the process of creativity. There is something which you cannot achieve in your life. You try to achieve it in your dreams. So, the dream process is directly related to the creative process. The dreams and creativity are related to each other. And which age other than Romanticism can be considered as the most creative age in the history of English literature? Therefore, intensive dreaming was regarded as a vital feature of talented poet. Friends, as Coleridge belonged to the age of Romanticism, so he must be that masterpiece of dreaming. And that intensive dream, the impactful dream, the dream that changed the life of Coleridge, is regarded as the vital feature of the talented poet, and Coleridge has proved it through this poem, Kubla Khan. Coleridge is a talented romantic poet. The way he has explained the dream was never explained by William Wordsworth. So, the excellence, the command which he has over supernaturalism, over, let us say, dreaming, over creativity, was never touched by William Wordsworth. Before the Romantic period, dreams served as a literary framework, and for the first time, the contents of dreams became the focal point of interest. Friends, it was after the Romantic age, maybe in the Victorian age, the analysis of dreams became very famous. What is the literary framework of the dream? Why do we see dreams? What are the symbols which can created through dreams? And the content of the dreams was analyzed at a larger scale in a scientific manner, and it became the focal point of interest for the critics and scientists and the psychologists, psychiatrists after the Romantic period. One main idea in the Romantic period was that dreams were revelation of reality and affected real life. Friends, when we talk about this Romantic let us say period 1798 to 1830, we see that the dreams are considered as the revelation of realities, something that is not unnatural but quite natural and exist as like a stone we see in the real life. Dreams affect real life is the message which Coleridge wished to give through this poem Kubla Khan. Through dreaming, poets were believed to be consciously monitoring their own imagination and the shaping of the creative process itself. Friends, when we look at, let us say, this process of dreaming which poet is trying to create in this poem, we see that poet believed to be consciously monitoring their own imagination. Poet is, let us say, monitoring his own imagination, he is trying to create that imagination. Shaping of creative process is being done through the poet in this poem. Therefore, dreams and dreaming were very important instruments in the creative development of the poet. So, this, let us say, dreaming is a part of creative development of the poet. The more poet is perfect, the more he can, let us say, visualize things in the dream. Many poets documented their dreams in notebooks. Coleridge, for example, left a vast amount of written records behind, covering the range of topics including nature studies, self-confession, self-analysis, and of course dreams. Friends, not only Kubla Khan but Coleridge has many such kind of experiences. He noted them into a, let us say, written form, record which was posthumously came under the hands of the readers, and that record considered talking about the different range of topics. It talked about the nature studies, talked about self-confessions. Coleridge wished to confess to himself or to world. The self-analysis, he is trying to analyze his own work, his own poetry. And of course, Coleridge talked about the dreams which he can see under the influence of the opium. In his enigmatic poem, Kubla Khan, Coleridge initially reveals the source and framework of his literary work in the title itself, Kubla Khan, or a vision in a dream, a fragment. Friends, when we look at the title of the poem, it justifies, it reveals the source and the framework of this poem. The title is Kubla Khan and there is a subtitle given with that, or a vision in a dream, a fragment. It is a part, it is a fragment. Maybe the complete dream is forgotten by Coleridge because of the disturbance of a, let us say, a stranger. But whatever he has written is the vision, a dream which he can see into his, let us say, into his virtual world. Furthermore, the reader is provided with a detailed commentary on the genesis of the idea behind the poem and the moment of creation. When we look at, let us say, the background of the poem, we see that as a reader we find the detailed commentary of the genesis of ideas, how the ideas originated one after the other, what is the relation between those ideas behind the poem and the moment of creation in which this let us say the pleasure dome is being constructed by Kubla Khan. All that movements are step by step analyzed into that supporting material. In a prose preface, Coleridge contemplates the hazy world of ideas deriving from sleep and dreams as an integral part of the poem. When, friends, we look at the preface of this poem which Coleridge wrote in prose form, we see that Coleridge is trying to contemplate a hazy world of ideas, something that is crazy, something that is different from the real world. He is trying to derive it from sleep and dreams as an integral part of the poem. For Coleridge, everything which he saw in the sleep and dream is real. Moreover, he states his position as an author in the process of artistic production, describing with equal fidelity the dream of pain and disease. We can also believe that when Coleridge is writing this poem, he is, let us say, trying to state his position as an author. He is trying to create the process of artistic production. He is trying to describe the equal fidelity of dream in pain and disease. Even if you are in pain, even if you are in disease, you can see few dreams and they are real for you. In Kubla Khan, Coleridge illustrates the susceptibility of the artistic imagination to the world around it, as with dreams. Furthermore, he explores literary creation by means of comparison of dream state. Coleridge is trying to create that comparison, a dream state, into this poem Kubla Khan. The overall text is structured in three sequences. First, the prose preface and the lyrical poem, which itself is divided into two parts with two different protagonists. So, we have the poem divided into two parts and then we have a prose preface of the poem. So, basically the complete piece is divided into three parts. Every section of the poem is engaged with the dream and the artistic process in a distinctive manner. After the preface, the poem begins with a description of the stately palace built by the Mongolian ruler Kubla Khan. When we look at the, let us say, dreaming, the process of artistic process of dreaming in this poem, we see a very different kind of, let us say, interpretation. After the palace, the poem begins with a description of a stately palace built by the ruler Kubla Khan. We see that how Kubla Khan is constructing that, let us say, beautiful palace. The site on which the pleasure dome is built seems to be a representation of the landscape, typical of romantic poetic imagination, opposing and superior to reason. So, when we, let us say, friends, look at this pleasure dome being constructed, a kind of metaphor used in the poem, we see that the representation of landscape is shown in the romantic poetic imagination form in Kubla Khan, which is opposing and superior to reasons. We cannot, let us say, imagine this poem with reason. There is no reason or let us say illusion is spreaded everywhere in the poem. Nevertheless, in this sublime dream scenery, the third person narrator then describes a deep fracture in the earth, hidden under the forest of dense trees, and uneasiness pervades the poem. Friends, when we look at the sublime, very unique dream scenes of the poem, we see that there is a third person narrator also, which describes the deep fracture in the earth. Maybe that deep fracture is a cliff, you never know, and hidden under a forest of dense trees, and this deep fracture, that cliff, is somewhere, let us say, hidden under a forest of dense trees. Maybe we fall into it if we are not cautious. The uneasiness which prevails in the poem is created because of this, let us say, terrible, realistic, natural scenes. The second part of the narrative continues with the movement of first person. Friends, when we move further and when we go to the second part of the narrative, when the poet was disturbed by a stranger, we see that the second part of the narrative continues with the movement of the first person. Maybe Coleridge is trying to explain everything on his own, or maybe the stranger is trying to explain everything to Coleridge. The speaker explains his own vision of Kubla's pleasure dome. So, the speaker, who is the speaker here? Maybe the, let us say, Coleridge or the stranger. They are explaining about their own visions of Kubla's pleasure dome, what Kubla wished to, let us say, talk about in this poem, and the way he dreams, he would revive this spiritual experience again in his imagination. Poet wished to create that spiritual experience again. He wished to go into that imaginary world again. The poetic creation which somehow, let us say, created in the mind of S.T. Coleridge, he wished to create that again, and the intense dream through which that poetic creation is made, poet wished to see that dream again. So, in this way we can see that the state of Coleridge was a kind of transcendental state. There are American poets which had talked about transcendentalism, then there are British poets also, which later in the present century, I am talking about the post-colonial, let us say, postmodern world after Second World War, they are still talking about the transcendental state, and the people are writing about that state. Sometimes the poets and the fictional writers, they move in the stream of consciousness state into that transcendental world, and thus that transcendental world is much real to them. like the present world. I hope that you will take this poem Kubla Khan not only as a, let us say, romantic poem, but also as a poem which goes deep into the human mind, how things are created in the human mind, how the dreams are, let us say, constructed in the human mind, what is the virtual world, what are the characteristics of that world, how poet, let us say, feels comfortable into that virtual world, and all these things when clubbed together can construct such kind of beautiful poem again in the, let us say, poetic world. I hope that you will consider this poem now with a different perspective rather than simply considering it as a romantic poem. You will now consider it as a poem talking about human psychology, human characteristics, human traits. I think that we have to an extent understood the way the poet is trying to explain and justifying the dream vision in romanticism, because it is a dream, it is a vision which poet is trying to see, and how in the, let us say, romantic touch the poet has covered that dream vision is the essence of this poem Kubla Khan. That is all for today. Thank you for listening.